Envisiontech podcast. I'm your host, Paul Gagan, and this week we're going to talk about working on a project from start to finish. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about what it's like to work on a project, and in this episode, more specifically, a web development project, because that's what I'm personally very familiar with. So, obviously, building a website isn't maybe as simple as it may seem. You don't just, put it together and that's it, you're done. There's actually a lot to do, especially depending on the kind of website that you're trying to make, which we'll talk about that a little bit more here now in a second. Before we actually talk about the different kinds of websites and what it's actually like to create one, it's really important to understand the different stages that are involved. So with, pretty much any project, there are a few different stages. And the first one, as it should be with just about any project, is planning. After that, you'll usually have the design stage, the development stage, the testing stage. Then you might actually have your launch. And then after that, you'll have maintenance or maybe ongoing development after that. So already we have quite a few different stages here. And each one of those obviously has its own steps. And some of those stages are bigger than others. But that should give you an idea of maybe the complexity involved in sort of doing a project like this. This episode will hopefully give you an idea of, just the process involved in completing a project in general, but more specifically a web development project. And if you've never done that before, then hopefully it will help you understand how you could go about it. Because you could totally, launch a website without doing all of these steps, but that is not a good idea. You could just develop the website and launch it, and that's it. But if you're going to skip out on over half the steps, then you're probably going to get less than half of the result, if that makes sense. So, as I mentioned, this website is this episode is more so aimed at people who are maybe not super familiar with making a website, or even people who are, but they want to maybe see if they can learn a little bit more. Because even me, I find myself constantly learning about new tools or new things that I should be doing in order to make sure that things run as smoothly as possible. So it's really important to kind of keep that in mind as we go through here. If you are a bit more advanced, maybe there'll be some things you already know. And if you are maybe a beginner, then maybe there'll be some things that you are a bit sort of intimidated by, but I'm going to do my best to explain them as well as I can. The first stage in this whole process, as I mentioned earlier, is the planning stage. So the first part of planning should be to define your goals. So, firstly, it should be, what is the purpose of the website? And this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. What type of website are you going to develop? So it could be e-commerce, for example, informational, a portfolio website. It could maybe be like a video sharing website, kind of similar to YouTube. It could be a streaming platform. It could be anything you want. But the first thing you need to do is figure out what you want it to be, because that will have a big influence on everything else to come. So before you even think about starting on the project, you want to sit down and say, okay, what is this project actually going to be? Because that way you can figure out what you're going to need to do for the project as well. The next thing is identify your target audience. So it might be the demographic that they fit in. Is it going to be targeted towards younger people? Is it going to be targeted towards people in a specific region? For example, Ireland is where I live. So a lot of the businesses here will be targeting people in Ireland, or maybe in Dublin, or maybe in Europe if they're a bigger business. It might even be specific interests that you're looking to target. It could be anything like that. It could be, you're trying to target their hobbies. If it's, for example, a more so running themed website where it's, maybe to do with finding races or something like that. So it's about kind of defining that target audience, because that will have a big influence on it as well. So setting goals or SMART goals, there's loads of other systems to follow. SMART goals specifically, I'm sure you've probably heard of them as by now, but they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound goals. So those will kind of help you make sure that you are staying on track, right? So, and you'll be able to sort of make sure that you're meeting them. That's why they're supposed to be specific, because you're supposed to set out exactly what should be done. Measurable, because you should be able to tell when it's finished. Achievable, it should be realistic. Relevant, I mean, it should be relevant to the project. It shouldn't just be something random, obviously. And it should be relevant to getting the project done. Because there's a lot of things you could do, for example, for a video streaming platform, but is it necessary to have it done to launch the website? Because if not, then maybe it's not relevant right now. And then time bound. So saying, I want to launch this website in the next 12 months. I want to launch this website in the next, 3 weeks, whatever. Because again, that will also hugely influence a lot of the following stages as well. Another really important thing is your competitor analysis. So, for example, if you were planning on making a video streaming service, YouTube might be a competitor. And possibly not, it depends on how you're planning on making money from it, etc., etc. But you need to find out if you have any competitors. So, that's really important for a lot of reasons. You should know if you have competitors, number one, because it's important to know that you might not be the only person in that space, but also you can have a look at their traffic, their engagement, etc. And if you don't know what traffic is, it just basically means how many people are going to their website, and engagements is in, how many people might be, for example, going on there and watching a video, or liking a video, or subscribing to a channel. For example, we're talking about YouTube. And then, how many people might be signing up for YouTube Premium or something like that. These are important metrics because it might be able to give you an idea of what sort of metrics you can expect. So if you can get, 1,000 people to go to your website, maybe 50 of those would be willing to pay for a subscription. So maybe you'll decide then that you should introduce a subscription, and as part of that you'll offer whatever else. But it's important to be able to consider these things when you're designing a website, well, not designing a website, when you're planning a website, so that you can really make sure that you are targeting the correct amount of people, and you have realistic goals. So it's also really important to look at a company like, a platform like YouTube and say, okay, this is what's good about YouTube, right? A lot of people use YouTube. They have some great creators on there. But there's also a lot of people who have complaints about YouTube, whether it's about their copyright takedown problems that they have, whether it's about, revenue for smaller creators, etc., etc. There's a lot of issues that people have with YouTube. So could you do anything to address those? And obviously, I said I'm just using YouTube as an example here, but this could be anything. If you're, a football club, what is the other football club in the area doing? How are they attracting new people to the team, or whatever it might be? I'm just using YouTube as an example here. But it's really important to consider your competitors. Even for me as a software company, it's important to consider, are there any other software companies here in Dublin? How much are they, getting people to pay for an app or a website? What services are they including with that app or website? What size team do they have? How fast do they deliver that website, etc.? It's really important to kind of look at your competitors, because it's great if you're charging the same price as somebody else, but if it's going to take you twice as long and your work isn't going to be as good and you don't include any of the same things for free, are people really going to go for your website? Probably not. If you're a beginner and you're just starting out, maybe don't charge as much as some big company, who's just down the street that is already doing quite well, because in reality, you're probably not going to get many, if any, customers, because people will look at you and say, okay, that's fine, I could go with you. They will look at the company down the street and they'll go, okay, they just seem better. So maybe start out by charging a bit less at the start. And obviously you can increase that over time, but at least you'll be getting some clients. so it's really important when you're sort of deciding how you're going to sort of go ahead with this project to look at your competitors. Another really important thing to consider is the content strategy for the website. So it can be helpful to have a content calendar, essentially, to plan content creation and distribution. So this will help you decide when you're going to create certain content for the website and when it's going to go live. So for example, if you have a blog, you might have a certain day of the week where you sit down and write a blog. And I created this podcast. It's not specifically for my website. You can see it on my website, but it isn't specifically made for my website. But I have a plan essentially in place to go ahead, come up with the idea for the podcast, write the show notes, record the episode, publish it, etc. Now, that doesn't always go to plan, but that's on me. If you have a content calendar, it is up to you to follow it. And it is really helpful. Even myself, I know, if I can stick to my sort of schedule for planning my podcast episodes, they're usually really good. And I usually feel way better about them. I get more time to sort of think about them and maybe come up with good ideas for them, etc. Obviously, keyword research and SEO best practices. So, keyword research, number one, keywords are just things on Google that people search a lot. So, for example, if you had a bakery, right, you might look at what things people are searching for on Google, do a bit of research and find out that, actually, a lot of people who are looking for, baked goods are looking for cookies, or they're looking for custom cakes, or they're looking for, I don't know, a cake for their wedding, something like that. So you will try and make sure that you include that in your website so that Google is more likely to recommend your website then when somebody searches for one of those keywords. SEO optimization is part of that. That stands for search engine optimization. And what that is essentially you writing a bit of information that is specifically given to the search engine, whether it be Google or Bing or whatever search engine you're using. And it will help it decide whether to show your website or not. So you'll have a title, a description, and there's a bunch of other things that you can add as well, but those are the basic two things that you should add. The title is what shows up besides your website, like your website name, and then the description is the little preview that shows up below. So that will let people see kind of what your website is about. So knowing what to put in that title and what to put in that little description can actually have a big influence on, number one, whether or not Google shows your website in the first place, or number two, if people click on it at all. And obviously, those are very important things. Now, another really important thing here is technical considerations. So there are quite a few here. So domain names, right? A domain is essentially something like google.com. That is the domain that Google has. My company has envisionly.tech, and that is our domain. So it is essentially where people can find you on the internet. It is really important to have a good domain. It is not as important as it used to be when people used to have to type them in more often, but it is still really important because it can make your brand look more or less trustworthy. And some of the time at least, people do be typing in your domain. And also having a memorable one is going to make it easier for people to remember your business and your website. So it's really important. But the domain name is essentially where your domain lives. And one of the first things you're going to want to decide is obviously what is your domain going to be. So obviously mine's Envisionly. And then what essentially type of domain you're going to have. So is it going to be a .com, a .net, a .tech, etc. There are probably hundreds of different kinds of domains that you can have, and some of them have different meanings. So for example, you could have domain.ai. So that is specifically for AI related things. There's .shop, there's .org, etc. There's .ie, which is specific to Ireland. There's .co.uk, which is more so for the UK. So again, it's important to consider these things. For example, if you're just planning on having your business in the UK, maybe you're better off getting a .co.uk. If you're planning on having a more global business, maybe you want a .com. If you're doing something, more AI related, as I said, maybe you want a .ai. Again, this can have a really big influence on whether people click on your website in the first place or not, and also whether or not people actually trust your domain as well. Now, another thing to consider here is hosting your website. So this is a bit of a complicated topic, but for example, right, there are solutions where Google or WordPress or somebody like that might handle most of it for you, and Google's obviously is a bit more complicated than WordPress, but a lot of that is handled for you, whereas a solution like DigitalOcean is a lot more managed by you, and there's a lot more work in there, but sometimes it can be quite a bit less expensive. So if you know what you're doing, you can actually save money and potentially have a better setup depending on what it is that you're doing as well. So it's really important. Now, in terms of choosing a reliable hosting provider, it's a little bit difficult because it really depends on your needs. For example, you can get free hosting for some websites. If your website doesn't have blogs or a checkout or anything, and it's just information about your company or whatever, and maybe a phone number and email, you can probably host that for free. And it's really important to kind of keep things like that in mind, because you shouldn't be spending money if you don't need to. Especially if you're just starting up your own business. It's really sort of important to save money where you can. And also, what is your website for? Are you expecting a lot of visitors to your website? If so, then you might want to go with, a bigger company like Azure, for example. Well, Microsoft, but Azure is the hosting provider, who offer more like enterprise solutions. Are you going to be handling a lot of user data? Maybe again, you want to look at a hosting provider who focuses more so on security, etc. There's a lot of considerations to kind of go into there when you're thinking about actually hosting a website in the first place. The next stage then is the design phase, which you might think, oh no, I'm just going to start developing the website, whatever, but it's important to consider the design of the website before you do that, because that can have a big influence on the development. So the number one thing that you should be considering here isn't what you want. It is not what you want the website to look like or how you want the website to work. It is user experience, UX, you might hear that called. And I mean, it is essentially whether or not your website will succeed. What is the user experience like for your website? Because if it is bad, people will not use it. You need to consider this straight away as soon as you start thinking about the design. Let's say you're making that YouTube competitor. Is it easier to search for a video on YouTube than it is on your platform? Okay, well, people probably aren't going to use your platform. Is it easier to, find videos that you like on your platform? Then people might use it over YouTube, etc. What is the experience like for the users? Because you have to remember, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you think of the website. It matters what they think of the website. And yes, your website, obviously should be what you want it to be as well. But you have to realize that websites aren't built for, the people who are making them. They're built for the people who are using them. So it is really important, like really, really important to keep that in mind. So many times have I had to tell a client, yeah, I like that idea. It sounds very cool. Honestly, though, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think people would like that. That experience would not be good for people. We could make it way simpler or whatever it might be. Maybe it's not good for accessibility's sake, which, again, super important. But yeah, it's really important to be honest with yourself and others about the experience that users will have on your website. So, another thing that can kind of help you with this user experience sort of journey, if you will, is user personas, right? So this is essentially where you say, okay, I am, this person. Let's say you're me. You're thinking about, designing a website, and you're thinking about how it'll work for somebody who's blind. So you're saying, okay, I'm Paul. I can't see. I use a screen reader, and I'm on a computer. How am I going to navigate this website? What is this experience going to be like? And that's where journey mapping comes in. So, what is the journey like for Paul to go to our shop, add a product to his cart, maybe add any options to that or whatever it might be, go to the cart, review the information there, maybe put in a promotion code, check out, go through the checkout, pay. What is that experience like? Is that too hard? Will it take him too long? If so, he might not use it. What about somebody with a bad internet connection? What is it like if, I'm connecting to this website and I don't have fast internet? Does everything load? No? Okay, well, I'm probably going to leave. What is that user going to experience? And it's important to consider it for everybody, not just you. It's great if you have gigabit broadband and you're sitting at home, you don't have any disabilities, you have a really fast computer or phone or whatever, etc., etc., etc. You're really used to technology. That's all great. But if you make this really complicated website that has all this stuff on it and it takes up a lot of like bandwidth and data, I mean, great. Some people might like it, but a lot of people probably won't. So it's again important to consider every user here. So obviously the visual design is very important, right? And that is the first thing that people see when they go to your website is what does it look like? They don't even really see how it works first. They see what does it look like? Where is everything? So obviously visual appeal is really important. It should look nice. It shouldn't look terrible. That might sound obvious, but you'd be surprised at the amount of, visually unappealing websites out there. And consistent branding. Oh, I hate this myself. When you go from one page to another on a website and it is just like you've gone to a whole nother website made by a whole nother company, that is terrible. You want consistency in a website. You want like consistent header and footer, pretty much always. There are exceptions. If I go from one page to another, I don't want to be like, whoa, now the background color is red and it looks like I'm, on the McDonald's website as opposed to, like my bank's website or whatever. That would be ridiculous. So again, ensuring consistency across your whole design, really, really important. And don't use, like different, essentially, different things for the same thing, as stupid as that may sound. If you have a button, for example, that is meant to indicate that something is clickable and it's this color, and when you hover over it, it changes to another color, use that everywhere. Now, you can have multiple styles of those buttons. That's fine. But don't just have different themes essentially on every page, because it just ends up being ridiculous. And there's no consistency at all. Now, as part of this, you can actually use, if you have any, your knowledge of psychology here, or you can do some research. Brands do this all the time. For example, the color red, I believe, is supposed to make you hungry, hence why a lot of food brands include it in their logos. It is supposed to, I don't know the exact psychology behind it. My wife would know better. She has a psychology degree. I don't. But it is supposedly meant to make you want to eat, right? So it is important to consider things like that. And obviously there's more, to it than just colors. But just to kind of give you an idea, even just your simple color choices in your logo, or what colors you're going to use for your, like the background color of your header, if there is one, or whatever it might be, can have actually a pretty big effect on what people think of your website. Obviously, having your website being responsive. So if I'm on my phone and I turn my phone to landscape mode, it probably shouldn't look the same. Your website should probably adapt since my screen is now wider. If I'm on your website on my phone and if I'm on your website on my computer, it should probably be different. And look, again, it depends. As always, there are, different situations, etc., where maybe that isn't necessary. But with a lot of websites, it is. So that's why if you're on a website on your phone, maybe they have like a little sidebar that comes out when you click the hamburger icon to open up the navigation menu, right? Or then you go to the website on your computer and all the navigation links are just at the top of the website. That right there is exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe on mobile, you get all the products just in a vertical list, so one on top of the other. But on desktop, maybe there is, a grid, and the grid is 3 products wide. But then when you're on your phone, if you turn your phone into landscape mode, maybe it's only 2 products wide as opposed to 3, just to make sure that you can still read all the text and that everything still fits correctly. So your website being responsive is really important. And if you're making that YouTube competitor, it's important to consider how many videos do I want to show up on the screen at once. When you're on a video, if I have a little recommended section, do I want that to be like horizontal? If so, how many videos should be there at the same time? Where am I going to have like these buttons, for liking the video, disliking the video? How many actions do I want to show up on the like video controls? Do I want to have a more options menu, etc.? Really important. And will it be different depending on what device people are on? Because the answer should probably be yes. There's a lot of obviously design tools to help you sort of come up with designs, and you don't necessarily need to use these, but they can definitely be helpful. There's, for example, Figma, Adobe XD, Sketch, etc. There's a bunch of different tools that can help you sort of create designs before you actually get into the development phase. Speaking of which, actually, that is the next thing on our list. So, I suppose the first thing that you will see when you go onto a website is what the front-end developers did. So, front-end development is, it is the front of the website. It is the part that you see, if that makes sense. So that's why, at least partially why it's called front-end development. So this is usually comprised of things like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This can vary. For example, you might be using PHP instead of JavaScript, or you might be using a framework. But at the end of the day, when you look at a website, it is probably made with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, especially now. And if you're not familiar with those, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And what that does is it lets you set the structure for the page. So it lets you say, okay, this is going to be the header of the page where the nav bar is going to be. In the nav bar, there's going to be some links. On the page, we're going to have some text, and then we're going to have an image, and we're going to have a button. And that's what HTML does, right? So you can essentially think of HTML as like the blueprint for the page, right? Then CSS takes that blueprint and it turns it into a nice design. So it takes those boring lines with the boring words and makes it look nice. It makes your button look nice, it makes your image the right size, it makes your nav bar have a background color. Oh look, now when you hover over the links, they change colors. Your text is now using like a nice font, etc., etc., etc. That's CSS. That's Cascading Style Sheets. That's what it stands for. And lastly on the list there is JavaScript. So that is what adds the functionality to your website. So it takes it from a design and turns it into something that you can interact with. So when you click that button, now something actually happens. When you click those links, technically that's part of HTML, but you can also use JavaScript for it too. But yeah, so now when you click the hamburger icon, oh wow, the sidebar opened. When you hover over the image, oh now it gets a bit bigger maybe. I don't know, like there's a lot of different applications for JavaScript. Oh, now the blogs load on my homepage. Now when you go to my products page, the products show up. Now you can use the cart, etc. That is all JavaScript. JavaScript is what adds functionality to your website. And I guess not all websites technically have JavaScript because not all websites need it, but pretty much every website has JavaScript. There are few that do not have any. The only real way you could not have JavaScript is if you just had a page with information on it, and you could maybe have a few other pages, but they could just have information, and that's really it. And you could not have JavaScript on that website. But that is not very common, especially nowadays. So another important thing to consider here is cross-browser compatibility. So obviously there are a lot of different browsers out there. There's Chrome, Firefox, Brave, Safari, Opera, etc. There's a lot of them. And it is important that your website works across all of them. It is fantastic if your website works on Chrome, because I think that's about 60% of the market share, and maybe slightly higher actually. And yeah, your website working for 60% of people is great. But what about those other 40%? You know? And it might not seem like a big deal, but let's say your website is making you, €1,000 a month, right? That's great. But would you rather €1,000 or would you rather €1,400? Because that extra, 40% will essentially let you get that extra money. Well, actually, sorry, it's actually more than that. So it's almost double, actually. So let's say you could get 50%, well, essentially double the users, right? Could use your website. You could take that €1,000 and turn it into €2,000, which then takes you to €500 a week, which is then actually above making minimum wage, right? Because if you're only making €250 a week here in Ireland, that is less than minimum wage, at least for a full-time job, whereas €500 is then above minimum wage. So that's a big difference though. If you can have that many extra people using your website, that is a really big deal. So yeah, it might be like, okay, well, it works in Chrome and Edge and whatever. Do I really want to make it work in Firefox? I don't know. Is it worth it for the, whatever percent of users? It's not huge. Probably. Even if it's just 5% of users. Even if it's just 1%. Wouldn't you like 1% more money every month? I mean, if I could do something to just make 1% more money every month, I'd probably do it. 5% more, 10% more, whatever. Wouldn't that just be nice to have that just going on, essentially, in the background? Obviously, using a framework is something that I mentioned earlier, and if you're not familiar with what a framework is, it essentially takes away writing that HTML and JavaScript, and sometimes even CSS, right? Because, well, I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, so a framework, I mean, as it says, it kind of gives you something that's already built, right? It is a framework to work from. So, for example, there are UI frameworks, which are user interface frameworks, that come with components already made. So they'll already have like a sidebar for your navigation menu. They'll already have like buttons, and they'll already have like maybe a cart or whatever else, that you might want. Then there are frameworks like React, Angular, Svelte, Vue, Solid, etc. There's a lot of them. Django. A lot of them are made with JavaScript or for JavaScript, and some of them are built for another programming language called Python. But they essentially let you do things that are much harder in regular HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, or they improve that experience. So, for example, Svelte isn't so much there to build the website for you. It is just there to take away some of the harder parts that might be a bit more monotonous and kind of repetitive, and make using JavaScript a bit easier. And that's actually what we use here at Envisiontly. We use Svelte and SvelteKit specifically, which is the actual framework, which really helps speed up the development process and make things a lot faster. And obviously, if you're not comfortable with writing code yourself, there are website builders out there, and a lot of what I've already said still applies to all of those. So if you want to use, Wix or Squarespace or something like that, that's up to you. Obviously there's benefits and drawbacks that come with both methods. So obviously just keep those in mind. But yeah, it's all still totally applicable, obviously except for maybe the coding part. But even then, I believe you can code in something like WordPress. I believe you can add your own custom code if you want. So the next thing then is the back-end development. So that's the bit that the users might not see. So that's things like, okay, well, now I've placed my order, now it goes to the database, or now, it gets sent off to Stripe so that they can charge my card, or whatever it might be. That is the back end of our application. So it essentially is what runs on the server. So in a website, usually you have a server or maybe multiple, depending on how many people are using it. And then you have the like client side code, or like the client side of the application. So the actual front end part, a lot of the time, is actually running in your browser. So it'll be running in Chrome or Firefox, and the back end will be running on a server. And how it works is the front end sends requests to the server, and the server will then send back a response. So the front end will say, hey, I'm going to move to this page. And the server will say, okay, here's the page. Or it will say, hey, I need the data for this product. And the server will send back the data. Or, hey, this person just placed an order. Here's the order number, whatever. Send this off to Stripe and charge their card. So they're essentially two separate pieces that work together to make your website work. So, there are a lot of different back-end frameworks, and some frameworks actually do front and back-end as well, which is really important to kind of know. You don't necessarily have to have them separate in terms of developing them. Some frameworks you can develop them both at the same time, and then it will take care of splitting them up for you, which is really cool. SvelteKit, again, takes care of that for you. You develop your front end and back end as part of the same sort of project, and then it will know which parts are which. And it's a bit complicated to explain exactly how and why, so I won't get into that here and now, but yeah, it knows. So a few sort of popular examples of that are Ruby on Rails, Node.js. There's like a lot of different ones. So I'm not gonna, give you a full list, but yeah, there's a lot of different frameworks out there for handling the back-end part where you are getting different requests. So obviously, if you have this server running and you're sending it data, like people's, maybe their credit card information or their passwords or whatever it might be, it is important that that is secure. Number one, that the data is secure when it's being sent there. So that's why you'll see on a website it says HTTPS now, the S meaning secure, because it is encrypted. And encryption essentially means that instead of sending a request that says, oh yeah, Paul's, card number is 123456781, 123456778, it says, just random letters and numbers. So we have no idea what it is. We have no idea what the message says at all. We don't know who it's, we know who it's from, kind of. But that's it, right? You can't tell what it is. And encryption works essentially by using what's called an encryption key to turn that regular text into those random letters and numbers. And then the server has another encryption key that will then turn it back into regular text. And it is almost and essentially impossible to then read that data. It is very difficult. There's different encryption standards, so I can't really tell you exactly how difficult because it depends. But in general, it's basically impossible. And that's really important because one common thing relatively common thing that people used to do is they would intercept requests. So they would maybe be in a cafe with their laptop and they'd be connected to the Wi-Fi in the cafe. And you'd be over there typing away, doing whatever on your laptop, but they'd be able to see the requests that you're sending to a server because they weren't encrypted. And that's really bad because it might have your passwords, your credit card information, it might have messages that you're sending, etc. Which obviously you don't want a random person having those sorts of things. Now, your database often will also have encryption or will be secured in some sort of way. If you don't know what a database is, it's essentially where you keep all the information. So where you keep people's email addresses and passwords and phone numbers and their orders, etc. That's what a database is. And obviously it's important that that is secure. So you need to have, a specific user that has access to that database. They should have a password. They should only be allowed to do what they need. So you essentially give them the minimum required access. So if they need to be able to view orders, that's great. But maybe don't let them see the section that contains all of the user information, where it has their passwords and their emails and their phone numbers. Just let them view the orders where you can see like the sort of order amount and, what products were included, etc. So really important to consider things like that so that you don't have any problems with people accessing data that they shouldn't. So there are also obviously a lot of other things to sort of consider. And some of those are sort of the challenges involved in the development phase, right? So some of the more common ones are problems with responsiveness, performance, and security. So responsiveness can be a little bit hard to manage sometimes because number one, you have to obviously test it on every device and you have to come up with a slightly different layout for all these different devices. You have to make sure that your website can perform properly on every device with all these different internet connections and all these different scenarios. You have to make sure that all this data is secure, that people aren't accessing things they shouldn't, that you can't like log into somebody's account if you shouldn't be able to, etc. And it can be really hard to manage these. So in terms of sort of getting around these problems, I mean, with performance, it's important to not reinvent the wheel. So, for image optimization, for example, what this will do is it will essentially take an image and it will change what size it is. So it will make it bigger or smaller in terms of the resolution, so how many pixels it's made up of, depending on what device somebody's on. And you might wonder, why would you do that? That might make it look worse, and technically it does, but if you're looking at it on a very small screen, it doesn't matter. It will look the same as if it had a higher resolution. All it does is mean that you can download that image faster. So when you go to the website, the image will show up quicker, which is really important. And, using tools like that already exist can, number one, really speed up your development process, and number two, that they work. Using, databases like MongoDB and Postgres, and there's actually a lot of different databases, they already have these sort of security features built in, so you don't need to go and make your own sort of database or anything like that. Responsiveness, using a UI framework can save you time with those sorts of things. Using tools like Tailwind CSS. So if you are going to code all the CSS yourself, tools like Tailwind help you sort of create designs a little bit faster. It will make it way easier to sort of say, okay, well, on mobile, I want this grid to have 2 columns. On a slightly bigger screen, it should have 3. On a bigger one, it should have 4 or 5, etc., etc. So that you can sort of quickly come up with these designs and make them responsive and performant as well. So then the next stage after the development stage, which is usually one of, if not the longest stage, is testing. And this can also be quite a long stage. And testing is really important. I don't want to say that it's the most important stage, but it kind of is. Because if you don't test anything, it doesn't matter how nice your website looks or how great you made it, all this cool functionality you added. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. Because that's all that people care about. It's great if you have this really cool feature, but if they can't use it, they don't care about it. So there's a lot of different kinds of testing. Obviously, there's user testing, so actually going through and testing things out yourself or getting other people to test it. There's unit testing, which you'll actually code in tests. So you'll write these tests in code that will say, okay, I want to add an item to the cart and it should be this item and it should have this whatever, and it should have, and then we check what price the cart has, and then we change the cart so that it will be set to deliver that item. Okay, well now the cart price should be this, and it will essentially check if all that information is correct. And that's what unit testing kind of does. It does these little tests to ensure that the information that you are expecting is there. And there's a lot of other types of testing. There's automation, which you essentially have this automatic tool that will go through the website and check if everything works. So it'll go through and it'll click this button and it'll check this page and it'll do these different actions actually on the website. It won't just be code, again, to make sure that it works. And you can just run these tests automatically and you can see if they pass or fail, so that you know, okay, well, actually, it seems like we broke this functionality on, the products page or on the login page. We need to fix that before we can launch our website or push this update, etc. And there's a lot of other types of testing, but those are just a few. So obviously, there can be problems with the website, but the best sort of solution to problems is finding them before you release them. So, and that will happen sometimes. Sometimes a problem will get past you and you'll release your website and there'll be problems in the website. But it is really important to thoroughly test everything to make sure that it works before you release it, because otherwise your website will be full of bugs and people won't be happy with it. Now, when there is bugs, there are tools you can use like Sentry, for example. That's one that we use. We're pretty fond of it, but there's a lot of other ones. And that helps with the debugging process because it sends me an email. If somebody on the website encounters an error, it sends me an email and says, oh, by the way, this error happened, this is where it happened. Sometimes it even includes a little replay, as they call it, which essentially shows you what happened when the error occurred, which is really useful. It will give you information about the error. It will show you what the server said, like what error was on the server, etc. And it's really important to be able to, number one, understand these and have a process set up so that you can be alerted to them. Because otherwise people could be having all sorts of problems and you would never know about it. Version control is also really important. So if you don't know what version control is, it is essentially allowing you to switch between different versions of a project. So Git, right, is a version control software, and GitHub is essentially where you can store all these different versions of your project. So what that means is, let's say you update your website. Well, that has a huge problem. People can't log in anymore. They can't purchase anything. Oh, it's a crisis. You're not making any money. You can go on GitHub, say, I want to go back to this old version, and let's redeploy that now. So it'll swap back to the old version of your website. That way you can have a chance to fix what you broke and nobody's essentially losing out on any money anymore. Everything's fixed, everything's all good. You just need to go through, and then once you're ready to try again to update the website, you can try again. But if it doesn't work again, it's fine, because you can just go back to the old version again. So using Git or GitHub, etc., there's loads of other providers, for version control software is really important, because if you mess something up, it's okay. It's completely fine, because you can just roll back, as they call it. So again, performance optimization here, really important when you're testing, because essentially people just leave, right? If your website takes too long to load, nobody's going to stay around. It doesn't matter if you have the best website in the world. If it takes 5 minutes for your homepage to load, there will be nobody left at the end of those 5 minutes. You'll be lucky if there's anybody there after 5 seconds of your homepage loading, because the majority of users are gone after like 1 second. Every second that your website takes to load, well, every extra second after the first, you lose, I think, 7% of people. But I believe you lose like 90% within the first second or two anyway, right? So it's a lot of people. If your website takes 5 seconds to load, you may have lost, already 90% of people, 95% of people, etc. So really, really, really important. So I've already mentioned a few tips for sort of improving your website performance earlier, like image optimization. There's this other thing called caching, which you may have heard of or may not. Caching essentially will say, okay, I go to this website and there's a picture on the home screen, on the homepage of this website, I should say. I'm going to keep that image on my device. So your device will then store that image. So then next time you go to that website, you don't have to load that image again because you already have it. So therefore, the page loads faster. So it's very common for websites to employ caching, because it will just speed up your visits, right? It will mean you don't have to wait as long for pages to load, which is obviously good. The faster it loads, the better. Now, the next stage, and not the last stage, by the way, is actually launching the website. So usually you'll have a pre-launch checklist. So this will make sure that everything is complete before you launch the website and that everything is working correctly. So this will usually be essentially an outline of the essential tasks that you need to have done before you can launch. So it might be the content review, so going through reading the about page, reading the product information, making sure that it's all correct. Looking at your SEO or your search engine optimization. Are you using the right keywords? Do you have descriptions for all your pages and titles, etc.? Setting up analytics, so using a tool like Google Analytics, for example. There's loads of other ones. And that will essentially let you see this many people went to your website. They had this experience, they tried to use this link, it didn't work, etc. But yeah, so having all those different things set up and making sure that you have everything ready to go before you actually launch the website. So making a backup of your website at this point is usually pretty important. So a lot of hosting providers provide a backup service. So you can have your version control, which is great because that will be a backup of your code if you code your website. But you can also just have a backup of your website, where you can just say, okay, every 7 days, I want a backup of my website, and I want you to keep 2 of those backups ready to go. And then you can just switch between them whenever you want. What this also lets you do is it lets you slowly release an update. So let's say you update your website, you can have some people on the new version and some people on the old version. And technically that's not a backup, but having multiple versions of your website is really important, because then you can just switch between them. If there's a problem, you can switch back to the old one really easily, which again can be used in conjunction with version control, which again it doesn't do a similar function, but it can help achieve the same sort of goals of making sure that everything works correctly. And if there's any problems, being able to move back to the old version. And I said being able to sort of gradually release these updates. So let's say you do break the login page. Well, it's fine. You only, release that to 5% of users, and that's not great. 5% of people weren't able to log in for 20 minutes, but it's better than it being 100% of people, because those are the 95% of people were still able to log in and go about their day on your website. So it's not a big disaster. It's more of an inconvenience at that point. And obviously, as I said earlier, 5% of people is still significant, but it's far better than, 100. So really, really important. So there's also different launch strategies, and that's important to consider as well. So you can have what's called a soft launch, a hard launch, or a phased launch. So for example, in a phased launch, you might launch phase 1 of your website, which might be an informational website where you have information about your company, what kind of products you're going to sell, and when you're going to start selling them. Then phase 2 of the launch will be when you actually release the e-commerce part of your website. So now people can actually go to your website and they can add the products to their cart and buy them. And then maybe phase 3, you now have you release something else to help further enhance your website that will, help people get a better understanding of your products, whatever it might be. Let's say you're selling shirts, right? Maybe phase 3 is now you've added a custom shirt creator, right? So instead of just being able to buy your shirts now, people can go on there and they can build their own custom one. They can select maybe the fabric, the color, if they want like a picture on there or whatever. And that would be in phase 3, and you'll have that sort of phased launch. So deciding on your launch strategy is also really important. I said a soft launch or a hard launch, also kind of important. Is this going to be, wow, okay, we're ready to go. We're open, we're going. That's a hard launch. Or are you going to do a bit of a smaller launch? Maybe it's not going to be big and fancy and we're going to have everybody being aware of it. We're just going to slowly move things over and we're not going to make a big deal out of it. And that's a soft launch right there. You're slowly moving things, you're slowly releasing it, and it's not this big event. But that's what a hard launch is. It's, as I said, wow, big new thing, we're ready to go, we're marketing it, etc. So again, really important. And speaking of marketing, really important for a successful launch, because you can have the best product in the world, the best website in the world, the best service in the world, but it doesn't matter if nobody knows about it. If you have a YouTube competitor that is for sure better than YouTube in every way, it doesn't matter if nobody knows about it. If nobody uses your service, it's never going to be better than YouTube because it's not going to have anything on there. And it can't be better than YouTube if there's nobody uploading videos, if there's nobody watching videos, etc. So having a proper marketing campaign can be really, really powerful. And when I say a marketing campaign, you don't need to be rich to have a marketing campaign. A marketing campaign could be posting on social media. It doesn't have to be paying for Google ads or, TikTok ads or whatever it is that you want. And that is helpful. Don't get me wrong. If you can afford to do that, you should probably do it. But if you can't, post on Facebook about it, post on Instagram, post on LinkedIn, whatever, talk to your friends about it, send the link to your friends, go and post on some forum about it or whatever, talk to people in person about it, anything you can do, literally anything you can do to market your website or your project, whatever it is, to others will help. So again, keep that in mind, because if nobody knows about it, then nobody's going to use it. Now, another really important thing here is your post-launch analysis. So this is essentially where you'll go, okay, it's been a day or a week, whatever. Maybe even a month, 3 months, 6 months. You'll usually do a couple of these, right? Just to kind of see how things are going. And you should do it on an ongoing basis, if I'm honest. But you'll sit down, you'll say, okay, well, we've had 1,000 users visit our website. What problems have they had? Have they left within the first 3 seconds? If so, why? Is it because actually the website hasn't even loaded in those 3 seconds? Because if so, we need to fix that. Whenever they click on the shop page, they immediately leave. Is it because the prices are too high? Is it because the products take too long to load? The shop page not look nice, etc. Looking at those analytics can really help. Oh, maybe there's a broken link somewhere, so when you click it, it actually just gives you an error. Really important to find those and fix them as soon as possible. So obviously looking at the different metrics that you can have. So the conversion rate, so that would be, let's say you have an e-commerce website. How many people actually buy something from your website? Is it 1 in 100? Is it 1 in 10? Does nobody buy anything? If so, why not? How can we improve those metrics? And have they improved or declined over time? So you did your week 1 review. Great, 1,000 people visited your website. Now you're doing your, month review. And it turns out in the last week, only 900 people visited your website. Is that a normal fluctuation? Has it been slowly going down? Maybe week 2 it was 950, week 3 it was 920, this week it's 900. It's slowly going down, slowly but surely. Why? Why is it going down? Has something happened? Have people been having a worse experience? Have you not been marketing it as much? Maybe people, aren't a fan of a specific product or service, whatever it is. Really important to sort of keep those things in mind. So now the last phase in this sort of sequence, if you will, is maintenance and updates. And I've touched a little bit on this, but it's really important. And it is, again, one of the most important bits. And I keep saying that because they're all really important. But ongoing updates. Ongoing updates are really important. If I go to your website now and if I go to it next year, if it looks the same and it has the exact same information on there, that doesn't look great. Have you updated the copyright notice at the bottom of your website? If not, I hate that. When it's February and I go to your website and it still says the previous year, I'm like, do they even care? Are they putting any effort into this website? If they're not going to put any effort into this, are they going to put any effort into the rest of their business? And I'm not saying that you're not, because maybe you are, but that is the impression you're giving off when you don't update things on your website, because it is really, really important. Content management strategies, right? And that's not as fancy as it sounds. It's essentially just writing your blogs, social media integration, etc., so that when people go onto your website, they see, oh wow, they posted on Instagram 5 days ago, but they shouldn't see, oh wow, you posted on Instagram 2 years ago. Again, something I hate. I go to a website, it's like, oh, they have a blog. That's really cool. Go to the blog. 4 years ago is the last entry. That looks terrible. Remove it. Get rid of it or post. Those are your two options there. Either get rid of that blog, because honestly, it doesn't look good at all. It makes me question your business and question whether you're actually putting effort into things. So either write another blog or get rid of it. There is no point in having it there if you're not going to write them. If I'm not going to keep making these podcast episodes, it shouldn't be on my, website homepage, right? I should get rid of it. I could maybe keep the page for the podcast, but I certainly shouldn't be promoting it and acting like it's a big, important thing that I do. If the last episode was from 6 years ago, again, it just doesn't look good at all. So really important, okay? Really, really important to keep things updated. Performance monitoring, also really important. I already kind of mentioned this, but using these analytic tools like Google Analytics to keep track of how many people are visiting your website, what pages they're going to. Maybe you just updated the content on your homepage and actually people are visiting it more. More people are staying around for longer. So good job, you did good. Okay, can we apply those changes to some of those other pages that we have? If so, great. Maybe we can have people stay around for even longer on those other pages too. So having a sort of strategy in place to make sure that you're optimizing things for SEO, right? So seeing, okay, people who visit my website, again, let's go back to the YouTube competitor. When they look for animals, right? People who are looking for animals are really liking my website. They want videos with animals. All right, I don't care what animal it is, at the end of the day, they just want animals. Cats, dogs, sheep, cows, whatever. Who cares? Pelicans, no one knows. But they just want animals. What can we do to capture that market, right? How can we make more of those people come to the website? And also, how can we capture people who are looking for other things as well? Maybe they're looking for DIY, right, help. I don't know, something maybe looking for videos on cars or technology or whatever. How can we capture that audience instead? And well, I shouldn't say instead, as well as, because you don't want to replace your existing users. You don't want to get rid of them. You just want to add more. So you want to keep those people who are loving those cat videos, but you want to add people who are going to want to learn how to, build a shed. Really important to look at those different keywords that are attracting people to your website and being able to expand upon those and also sort of focus in on them as well and say, okay, let's get more people who are interested in animals on this website. Maybe we can run a marketing campaign based on that. It could be literally anything. It could be, oh, we have, the most DIY tutorials or, people love our cat videos, whatever it is. You could run a marketing campaign on that and you could capture even more of that market, which again would just help your website grow even more. So content marketing, again, really important here. The content of your website, being able to include different keywords and stuff in your website to kind of attract people to it, really important. So again, all these things really important for sort of the ongoing maintenance, so making sure that there aren't any problems with your website, updating your website, maybe including new features, changing the content of the website. Really, really important to ensure the success of your website. That covers the main stages of project development. So just to recap, okay, really important to plan your website, design it, develop it, obviously then test it, release it, and update it. Some important considerations here is who's going to use the website, how are they going to use it, what is the website actually for, what are we going to use to make the website, and when you're launching the website, as I said, making sure that everything's ready to go, that you have tools set up to find any errors people encounter, track analytics, etc., and making sure that you're updating your website on an ongoing basis. Those are some of just the key points from the episode and really important to keep all of those in mind. Hopefully you've been able to take something away from this episode, and if you have any questions or comments, as always, you can just comment on this episode, or feel free to reach out if you have any questions directly. That's always welcome as well. So that's going to be it for this episode of the Envisiontech podcast. As always, I'm your host, Paul Gagan. I hope that you have enjoyed, and I will talk to you all next week.